Project Runway, I have been keeping track of your progress for a very long time. You've been through your share of changes and switch-ups as you've tried and often succeeded to keep your competition show fresh and relevant through an impressive 2 decades of seasons. But what you've brought to the runway today? It's stale. It's obnoxious. It's the death knell of a show that is so deeply insecure in its ability to draw in and maintain viewership that the cracks show through in every way possible. Project Runway, you are out. Auf Wiedersehen. I don't even know how long I've been watching Project Runway. I'd guess that my relationship with the show goes as far back as season 2, which was released in 2005, which would have made me 7 years old at the time, and that sounds about right. And it used to be one of my favorite shows on TV. I used to dream of being on it in that little kid way that was ignorant about how much I actually dislike using a sewing machine, and if I ever go to New York City, it'll be a priority to stop at Mood so I can be one of those annoying people who say, "Thank you, Mood," when I leave. To this day, I still think it's a delight to return to older seasons. Even if the landscape of fashion has changed drastically since then, there's just something kind of timeless about them. It still makes for a good watch, and I believe it would even if you don't have the kind of extended history with the show like I do, so long as you're interested in the general concept of a fashion design competition show. But today, I'm not here to talk about the Project Runway that I love. I'm here to talk about the Project Runway that should, frankly, not exist. Project Runway has already been on a slow and steady decline for a better part of a decade, or arguably even longer than that. They faced a pretty big hurdle when host Heidi Klum and mentor Tim Gunn departed from the show in 2017. I wonder what happened in 2017. Oh.
It's Harvey Weinstein.
If I'm honest, the departure of Tim and Heidi was probably the point of no return. Heidi was the face of the show, and Tim was the heart, and more than that, they were deeply entangled with the show's branding. A lot of people didn't want to keep watching at that point, admittedly myself included, and so I've only seen a handful of episodes from seasons past 2018. However, those seasons didn't represent nearly the level of quality decline that we're seeing today. Perhaps the show had lost its spark at that point, but they still stuck to the formula. And so the show puttered along in a state of general unremarkability for 6 years, giving fans something to put on in the background and half pay attention to, and never quite getting back to the old heights of quality and viewership that it once had. And that brings us to the current year, and Project Runway is back from a 2-year hiatus during which the future of the show was uncertain. And now Heidi Klum is back too. Unfortunately, in my opinion, if they were going to bring it back like this, then maybe it should have stayed dead. Of course, with a show like this, any appraisal of it is going to be highly subjective, especially when it comes to the fashion. I won't pretend my taste is unimpeachable. Instead, I'm going to try to hone in more on things that I think are fundamental problems with the show itself and less on what the designers are putting out. Although there will be a little bit of that because boy, this season had a handful of real stinkers. I'm not going to spoil who won this season, but everything before that point is fair game, including the final remaining contestants. If you care about spoilers, go watch the show first. If you don't care about spoilers, or would rather not spend 7.5 hours of your life watching bad TV, stick around. Also, I can't use any clips. The copyright holders of Project Runway do not like it when you try to use clips, even in a manner that could be reasonably understood as fair use. That said, I will attempt to make this slideshow as engaging as possible. Anyway, let's get to it. Issue 1, the editing and other visual elements. So what makes good editing? Of course, there's going to be different answers to that question depending on who you ask, but in my opinion, good editing is editing that you do not notice. It exists in service to everything else that's happening on screen. When you step inside a beautiful, well-constructed house, your first impulse usually isn't, wow, the foundation on this place is top-notch. And that's what good editing is. It's the foundation that brings everything else together into a satisfying finished product. But when you step inside a house that's made of crumbling, half-painted drywall with the carpet hot glued to the floor, and the foundation is all done up in neon lights and there's gaps in the floor to remind you that it's there and signs everywhere saying, "Please notice how good the foundation is," that doesn't automatically turn it into a quality build. The impression that I get is that they wanted to use the editing to make the show seem like it has a high production value, but they've executed it in a way that comes off as extremely cheap. It seems like they're trying to drive up the energy at any opportunity, which I don't think is a good fit for this show. Project Runway has always been relatively calm and low-key in comparison to an average competition show offering, and I like that about it. You don't need people screaming in your face in 50 different camera angles per minute for a show to be interesting, and I guess whoever got their hands on the show decided that was a defect. I don't want to pretend that Project Runway was ever highbrow entertainment, but any aspect of it that could have tricked you into thinking as much has been eliminated. Any amount of sophistication has been abandoned on every level of the presentation. This season uses jump cuts like jangling keys in front of a baby. Like, my god, we've been looking at the same thing for 3 whole seconds! Cut to another angle now or else they're going to get bored! And the shaky cam! My god, the shaky cam! Nearly every shot outside the runway and the confessionals is shot with this handheld, intentionally jittery camera that somebody probably thought looks really dynamic, but mostly just makes you seasick when you watch it. Like, I'm not even exaggerating. I had to take breaks during my watch through because the relentless shaky cam was making me nauseated. Previous seasons also tended to use a handheld camera in the workroom, but in a way that was substantially less noticeable. It's hard to convey this using only screenshots, but compare the level of movement in a random episode from season 4 to a similar shot in season 21. It's like they were trying to film the show standing on a balance beam. Speaking of the workroom, I hate this set. I really do. There is just something about it that makes me think of Hobby Lobby when I look at it. I can't even really explain why I hate it. Like, I don't hate this blue, I don't hate this orange, but in the context of this set, I just really can't stand it. I'm not going to belabor this too much, but I think it ties into the needlessly pumped up energy exhibited by the rest of this season. It's so bright and so in your face to the point that it becomes distracting. And just chill. Cool it with the camera angles. Cool it with the PowerPoint style transitions. Just calm down, please. Next issue, the casting. I'd just like to make it extremely clear that when I say I have an issue with the casting, the responsibility for that does not fall on any of the individual contestants. These people are not responsible for the fact that they're here, nor for the way the show decides to portray them. When you select a cast for any reality competition show, you're selecting for personality as much as you are for skill and talent. I'd be willing to bet that there are tons of people who've been overlooked for this show in the past, even though their creativity and craftsmanship and ability to work under pressure is phenomenal just because they don't have a TV-ready personality. It's just that I feel like in this season, maybe they selected a little harder for personality than usual. And I feel like they selected for personality with the highest priority being on filling the workroom with people who are going to clash and create big explosive drama. Also, everyone is just screaming all the time. They go to a new place, screaming. They announce the theme of a challenge, screaming. Somebody walks in the room, screaming. So much screaming. Just from the first handful of episodes alone, you can very clearly tell who is going to make it to the end and who isn't, with perhaps one singular exception, because the rest of the cast gets so little screen time that you can barely even remember their names. In a typical season of Project Runway, you forget maybe the first 2 or 3 people who get eliminated, but you get enough time with the rest of them that they stick in your mind. Not this season. This season is very clearly the Ethan and the twins and sometimes VJ show. So one of this season's main characters is Ethan, more commonly known by the drag pseudonym Utica, because this show is trying to rake in viewers by any means necessary, and they will be pandering to the RuPaul's Drag Race audience because those are some of the only people who still watch reality competition shows, and I guess the Great British Bake Off is a bad fit for pandering. I'm honestly pretty sure that there was some kind of hidden agreement among production that Ethan had to stick around until the final episodes or else they'd lose that Drag Race audience that they are so clearly trying to reel in. But oddly enough, Ethan's treatment in this season felt both like he was being given an unfair advantage and being set up for failure at the same time. I'll elaborate more on that soon. The other couple of main characters are the Estrada twins, Jesus and Antonio. Jesus was a returning contestant from season 7, and Antonio was a newcomer. This isn't Project Runway's first rodeo with casting a set of annoying twins, and like Ethan, they were both competent designers, but I suspect that maybe they got a little unnatural judging priority because they both had loud, explosive personalities, and seeing whether the twins finally get split up is supposed to serve as a reason to keep watching, I guess. My opinion of these two, especially Jesus, just got more and more sour as the episodes continued, and this mostly has to do with their ruthlessly antagonistic treatment of our show's final arbitrary main character, VJ. Okay, so let's talk about VJ. It's not uncommon for contestants in this show to receive a villain edit, always highlighting their rudest moments, showcasing or even staging drama with the other contestants, and basically just giving the audience somebody to root against. And I believe for most of this season, VJ was the one receiving the villain edit. I have never seen a villain edit in any show that comes off as less warranted than the one they've given to VJ. From day one, you've got all these people in the confessional making snide comments about VJ's such a bitch, or she doesn't work well with others, or she's a silent killer, or she's always creating drama and other stuff like that. And if this season made any sense, you would then cut to VJ being rude, or saying cruel things about the other designers, or trying to sabotage them behind their backs. Except they apparently didn't have any footage of her doing that. And so VJ is apparently only getting this treatment because she's quiet and keeps to herself. Absolutely unforgivable. In general, I feel like VJ wasn't necessarily a good fit with the rest of this cast personality-wise because she just kind of does her work and doesn't really bother anyone else and isn't constantly screaming. Like, she could get sassy in the confessional, but everyone does that. Since she made it to the final 3, I'm guessing that the way they chose to make her interesting enough by this season's standards is to portray her like she's some kind of cold, cruel ice queen. And I was just not convinced by this in the slightest. This whole VJ versus the twins storyline really came to a head in the second to last episode, where each of the remaining designers were asked who they think should be continuing on to the final 3. VJ did not include either of the twins in her pick, citing that some other designers needed the prize money more. And this just completely set them off to the point that Antonio was storming off the set and demanding to go home, which is just, it's pretty funny to get this fuming mad over a mild implication that maybe you're not hurting for money while wearing a fur cape. Although, if I'm honest, I wouldn't be surprised if production made him do that. And afterwards, Jesus was just livid, on a hair trigger and screaming at her for every little thing. I honestly ended up disliking Jesus so much by the end of this season that my final episode notes look like blasphemy. In the final episode, VJ says something to the effect of that she suspects this relentlessly hostile treatment and needling from certain other contestants is transmisogynistic harassment. And yeah, that's something I was picking up on before she even said it. I'm glad that it was highlighted, and I'm glad that in this last couple of episodes they seem to pivot more into making it clear that the twins are being unreasonable and projecting their own behavior onto her. But before then, I distinctly got the feeling that the story was being told to turn the viewer against her. Okay, who are some of the others that get more than the absolute minimum amount of screen time? But believe me, it's not much. There's Belania, notable for being real good with silhouettes and having beef with Law Roach, or rather for Law Roach having beef with her. There's Joan, notable for being so adored by the rest of the contestants that the other person in the bottom with her was openly regretting not having done worse so he could have gone home instead. And then there's Joseph McCrae, notable for making a mean puffy jacket and also being annoying about insisting on being called by his full name, Joseph McCrae.
Hi, Joseph. No, you gotta say that first.
And what about everyone else? A total, absolute non-presence to a frankly hilarious degree. Actually, I started to notice something as I was watching this season. If somebody starts getting screen time who usually doesn't get screen time, that means they're about to be sent home. That, or they're doing a fake out and they're actually going home in the next episode. This is extremely consistent, and if you ever make the questionable decision of watching this season, I recommend you look out for it because it starts to get pretty funny. The overall effect of this is a cast that comes off as extremely unbalanced, with certain contestants seeming to get an unfair advantage based on personality, and others being reduced to shots of nodding along to what the main characters are saying and not much else. Previous seasons had a distinctly more ensemble cast, and even when certain contestants had that big, showy, TV-ready personality, they didn't get so much screen time as to make them feel like they're the main character. Competition shows shouldn't have a main character. It makes it extremely obvious who is going to last and who is not, and that spoils the fun. Next issue, the judging panel. Having a good team of judges can make or break a competition show, and Season 21's judging panel definitely tips the scales towards break. In this season, you've got the return of legendary supermodel Heidi Klum, editor-in-chief of Elle magazine and consistent judge ever since the show's inception, Nina Garcia, celebrity stylist Law Roach, and a rotating cast of guest judges. And I've got this weird little nagging feeling that something is missing. What about this panel of judges could be poorly suited for a fashion design competition show? Oh yeah, that's right. None of these people are fashion designers. In previous seasons, the resident designer as judge has been filled by Michael Kors from seasons 1 to 10, Zach Posen from seasons 11 to 16, and Brandon Maxwell from seasons 17 to 20. There has never been a season until now where a professional fashion designer has not been on the judging panel, and why on earth wouldn't they? That's like having a cooking competition show with no chefs as judges. There's value in having the perspective of someone who is intimately familiar with the process of creating clothes and not just judging the end result. So now we've got Law Roach in the role traditionally filled by a fashion designer, and I shouldn't just write him off on that alone. I mean, his job is still fashion. He should know clothes among the best of them. And it's not like he would do something completely ridiculous like repeatedly judging the contestants based on their styling choices that have nothing to do with the garments they made, right? Right? Oh, wait, he actually does this constantly. Constantly. To the point that he would rank a designer on the bottom despite liking what they've made solely based on the shoes and accessories they picked. Madness. This is not a styling competition show, and the appraisal of the styling should always be an afterthought in comparison to judging the design itself. But he's a stylist, that's what he does. It's almost like being a stylist is a very different job from being a fashion designer. The two aren't interchangeable, and being knowledgeable about fashion does not mean you are knowledgeable about fashion design. And he clearly isn't able or willing to rein in that priority when it comes to judging on this show. Now, don't get me wrong, the previous designer judges weren't infallible either, particularly Michael Kors, whose taste I often found questionable, but what he was qualified, and he wouldn't do something like write off the merit of an entire outfit just because he thought the designer picked the wrong shoes to go with it. Law Roach is also the only one who consistently calls out the contestants on their attitude, which I also find fundamentally irrelevant from the competition. Did you want a sassy and outspoken cast of characters that they've clearly selected for in the season, or do you want them to be meek and deferential and strictly professional at all times? Because you can't have both, and they have clearly set themselves up for the former. I've also seen him get a lot of criticism in online discussions about this season for being excessively snarky and mean, and this one I'm kind of on the fence about. While Project Runway has traditionally been a bit less mean-spirited than other competition shows from the era, it's definitely not a stranger to being mean-spirited. I mean, some of the things that would come out of Michael Kors' mouth were just abhorrent. There's a reason that shows with judging panels like this like to cast a mean one, and that's that it makes for good TV. It's fun to have a villain in the cast, and it's fun to have a villain as a judge. It's funny when they're mean over designs that clearly deserve it, and it's deliciously despicable when they're mean over ones that aren't. Law was more likely than not instructed to act this way by production, so I'm not going to fault him for what is essentially playing a character. But with that being said, I did find his snide remarks and his hypocritical and occasionally grudge-fueled resentment of any kind of pushback or perceived slight from the contestants to be pretty distasteful. He gave several of the designers this treatment, but one that really stood out was his nitpicking and needling over Melania's body language and tone of speech. He did this repeatedly in the latter half of the season, to the point that it kind of felt like he was singling her out and picking on her. The way he would repeatedly criticize the contestants' attitudes was also pretty hard to stomach, considering his record-high rate of rude comments and jabs in comparison to just about any of the previous judges on the show. Any gripes I have with his meanness definitely pale in comparison to his judging priorities, though. It would be great if Law Roach was the only weak link in this season's judging panel, but somehow he isn't, which is wild considering that there are only 3 permanent judges. I've got just one question. Where the hell is Nina? Why is she not present in so many of these episodes? Okay, if I ask myself, how many episodes is it acceptable for one of the members of the judging panel to be missing? I'd say 0? Maybe 1 if there was an emergency, maybe 2 if there was a real bad emergency. So how many times in this season was Nina MIA? 1? 2? It's not 3, is it? God, there are only 10 episodes. 5. Nina Garcia was a non-presence in 5 total episodes. That is half the entire season. How does this happen? I have no gripes with Nina as a judge, but I can't say her presence is one of the remaining pillars on which the watchability of the show relies. I get trying to prioritize a judge who has stuck around from day one, but I don't know, maybe it's time to move on? Does she even want to be here? Because if she did, I imagine she would be. I don't know what went wrong here, if it was scheduling issues or budget or total lack of interest or what, but this really should not be happening. And then there was that one episode where literally no other judge other than Law Roach showed up, and we'll get to that later. Next issue, Christian Siriano as mentor. Okay, so this is not an issue exclusive to this season. Tim Gunn has been out since 2018, and Christian Siriano, one of the very few people who has found enduring success as a fashion designer after winning Project Runway, has taken his place. And let me get this straight. Christian Siriano was a great contestant. He's very talented, his instincts mesh well with what the judges expect from the contestants, and he's messy and sassy and rude and all that stuff that gives reality competition shows flavor. This, unfortunately, does not translate to him being a good mentor. I'm not trying to make the argument that Tim Gunn is absolutely essential for the show to be watchable, but what he is highly suitable for the role. So when I draw comparisons between the two, keep in mind that my point isn't that I'm mad that Christian isn't Tim. I'm just using Tim as an example of a person whose personality, approach, and professional background makes him a good fit for the role of mentor. Basically, if Tim Gunn has the energy of the English teacher that all his students love, Christian Siriano is the theater teacher that all his students hate. If Tim's approach to mentorship tended towards being kind and gentle and constructive, Christian's approach tends towards being petty, bossy, and, well, kind of useless. There are multiple points during this season where you can point out specific instances of Christian giving a piece of advice that results in worse judging outcomes for the designers, including in the first episode. He complained to one of the twins that his base dress, which was meant to be the lower layer of a reveal, was so simple that, quote, "my intern could sew that in 30 minutes. And therefore Antonio decided to scrap the reveal and have this giant exploded flamingo of a cover-up be his main focus. And then he got put in the bottom 3, and the judges complained that he should have showcased the dress more. Antonio tried to point this out when he was being judged, just for Law to be like, don't blame Christian for the choices that you made, and I guess that's partially fair, but also maybe bring in a mentor who doesn't give advice that sabotages the designers. Just maybe. I didn't go back and watch the entire Project Runway backlog to make this video, so it's entirely possible that there are also instances where Tim gave advice that resulted in worse judging outcomes, but multiple times in a season feels like a lot. In the seasons where Tim was mentor, it was extremely unusual for any of the contestants to openly dislike him. There was a general feeling of mutual respect between him and the designers, and that endured even when he was giving harsher criticism. This is not the case with Christian. Several, if not most of the designers openly dislike him and express that they think he's annoying and that his criticisms are overbearing and unhelpful. I think it really draws the energy down for the designers and the mentor to have this kind of adversarial relationship. Compared to the runway, the workroom should be a relatively safe space where the designers are being encouraged to elevate their work as much as possible, not being undermined by the person who's supposed to be there to help them. And that's not to say that Tim didn't make the occasional biting comment. He's definitely given his fair share of zingers in the workroom, and yet it was still very unusual for any of the contestants to actively resent him. Even when he was being mean, you always got the feeling that his criticisms were coming from a place of appreciation. When he thinks one of the designers has lost the plot, he's very much the embodiment of not mad, just disappointed. There's something about his delivery that makes me feel like he could repeat the exact same comments that Christian is making and have it not come off as hostile. Christian, meanwhile, comes off as hostile even when he's being nice. If Tim was on everybody's side, Christian is exclusively on Christian's side, and the designers react to him accordingly. There's a clear reason for this obvious difference, and that's Tim's background in fashion education. Tim Gunn had spent 2 decades teaching at the Parsons School of Design prior to joining Project Runway, and it shows. Being a mentor is his specialty. He knows how to be an effective teacher. He knows how to give gentle guidance without making it come off as an attack. Christian does not have that same kind of mentorship experience. He's clearly used to being a boss, not a teacher, and he gives feedback like a boss, an unpopular boss at that. In the second to last episode, there's a guest appearance by Paul Tazwell, costume designer for the Wicked movies, and there's a little moment in the middle of the episode where he enters the workroom to give some feedback to the contestants. And just in his handful of minutes of screen time, he was such a breath of fresh air. His criticism was constructive, calm, reasonable, professional, everything that Christian generally isn't. I feel like his guest spot really proved the problem isn't the fact that Tim Gunn is irreplaceable, it's just that Christian is an inappropriate choice for this role. Unfortunately, I doubt that he's going anywhere at this point. Some people probably think this makes for good TV, and I've seen a handful of people expressing that they prefer Christian to Tim, but I do think I speak for the majority when I say that Christian is an inferior mentor by a pretty wide margin. He's stuck around for long enough at this point that I doubt that they'd be itching to replace him, which is unfortunate. I personally think he'd be a much better fit on the judging panel instead of the workroom, especially in comparison to Law Roach. Next issue, stupid gimmicks, weird choices, and bizarre sponsorships. This is basically just a list of bullet points with all my miscellaneous complaints. Starting with, number 1, everything feels rushed. Most of the episodes in this season were an absolute gauntlet of one-day challenges, and I cannot fathom why this decision was made. The standard turnaround for a Project Runway challenge is 2 days, 2 full days in the workroom and then a couple hours before the runway to add finishing touches. Most seasons feature a handful of one-day challenges as kind of a pressure test to see how well the designers work when they're forced to create something with an unusually fast turnaround. But what you don't see are one-day challenges accounting for a huge majority of the episodes. Because they suck. The designers hate them, nobody is doing their best work when they have so little time to get things done, and everyone in the confessionals were just like, oh my god, they're doing another one-day challenge, why is this happening, what's going on? And you know what? Same. When I said earlier that I suspect this cast was selected with an emphasis on personality over skill, I have absolutely no way to be sure that's accurate because no one is doing their best work when they have a 24-hour time limit over and over and over again. Like, of course I'd get the impression of a lower standard of skill when these designers are getting half the amount of time of a normal challenge. I'm just completely confused on why they decided to do this. Can they not afford to rent the workroom space for any longer than absolutely necessary? Could they not afford to pay the stage crew for any longer than that? Like, I have to imagine that this is some kind of attempt at a cost-saving measure and one that distinctly hinders the quality of the season. But surely they wouldn't apply this ridiculous time crunch to the finale where the designers are expected to submit their absolute best work, right? God, what do you think? What do you think? This whole season is a relentless onslaught of poor choices. Of course they'd rush the finale too. In earlier seasons in the finale, which is usually split into 2 episodes, the designers who made it to the final round got to go home and work on their collections for months, sometimes to the tune of nearly half a year. A whole lot of time to really let them cook and refine their concepts and show up at the runway with an exceptional final result. But this was back when the finale was still hosted at New York Fashion Week, so I guess the stakes are inherently lower. Season 21 of Project Runway gave the designers 5 days for their final collection. 5 freaking days for 5 total outfits, meaning the finale was also part of the relentless one-day challenge gauntlet. And don't get me wrong, the results of this extreme time crunch were pretty impressive, but it kind of pains me to think about how much more impressive it could have been if they were given a little more breathing room. Number 2, too many team challenges. The first several episodes were back-to-back team challenges, and boy, this started to get old by the time they finally dropped it. It's not unusual for Project Runway to have a team challenge or 2 for the first couple episodes of the season, because it automatically blocks off half of the contestants from elimination, which makes the judging slightly easier. I'm not really a big fan of these in the first place. They can protect people who deserve to go home from going home, and prevent people who deserve to win from winning. I'm way more interested in seeing the designers develop their own personal styles, rather than being forced to compromise for the sake of making something that meshes well with the rest of the team. The fact that they were made to do 3 team challenges in a row was annoying enough, but then they used this to double down on that main character issue that I mentioned before. Ethan and Jesus, due to winning the first 2 challenges, were designated team leaders in the 3rd episode. These 2 were already kind of commandeering their teams just out of sheer force of personality, but then this episode went and codified that. And the fact that both of these 2 made it to the final episode just kind of solidifies my belief that they knew that was going to be the case from the start. Number 3, stupid runways. This season loved to make use of silly, gimmicky runways, all of which are an immense waste of time, effort, and money and add truly nothing at all. What is this, A&TM? What's next, stage hazards? Runway number 1 is less objectionable. It's in some kind of castle foyer-ish setting, which works thematically because this was a Disney princesses versus villains challenge, with my only gripe being that there's a big fat set of stairs that serves as the entrance and exit. Runway number 2 is when things started to get stupid because they decided on pyrotechnics. I'm sure it'll really distract everyone from all the corner cutting they're doing in the season if the goddamn runway is on fire. And runway number 3, they just have a bunch of shit garbage strewn all over the runway. Just laying there like a bunch of unfrozen dropped leaves that have been rotting under a layer of snow all winter. Runway 4 is... we'll get back to that one. Runways 5 through 8 are normal, thank God, finally. And just when you think that maybe they've given up on the stupid runways, number 9 comes along with literal dead rotting leaves strewn all over the runway. So atmospheric. Great job, everybody. Number 4, the sassy confessional captions. I admit that this is probably a stupid thing to get annoyed over, but the way that the captions beneath the designers would change in response to what they're saying in this sassy, twee, millennial, oh no she didn't way just really got on my nerves. The default captions either say what kind of fashion the designers specialize in or their hometown, but if they say something in the confessionals that the editors thought was worthy of a reaction, they'll put a little zinger down there. Like, oh, he just got a sassy bit of criticism from Mr. Christian Siriano. Now he's clocked by Christian! Or Jones telling us that she's committing to this bold fabric and sticking with it despite some pushback from the others. Ding! Zero commitment issues! And I mean literally, there's a ding like this is CinemaSins. And then when she defends this decision later, ding! Zero commitment issues, ... still annoying. This is one step removed from my absolute least favorite reality show editing choice, which is to have a sassy narrator that tries to be a character and is constantly cracking wise and roasting the contestants. This is a little less annoying than that, but not by much. Number 5. What the hell are these sponsors? Project Runway is no stranger to having sponsored episodes, but I feel like in the past they've tended to be a bit more thematically appropriate. It was also unusual to have the majority of the episodes paired with a sponsor, but since this season is either hurting for money or addled by corporate greed or both, most of these challenges are brought to you by one corporation or another. Some of these are suitable. The athletic wear challenge was sponsored by an athletic wear company, fine. Some are less off-topic but still feel mildly shoehorned in, like the first episode being sponsored by Disney and the 9th episode being sponsored by Wicked for Good. Complete with an entire intra-episode trailer because they paid up for that screen time, goddammit, and they're gonna use it. Both of these sponsors still lended themselves to an interesting inspired challenge, so I can't say I mind too much. But then you've got episode 3, sponsored by PNC Bank. So how do you make a bank sponsorship feel like a well-integrated Project Runway challenge? Apparently, you don't. Or at least they didn't. So how did they try to make this work? Well, what are banks? What do you feel when you go into a bank? Bored. Because they're boring. And so the conceit of this challenge was to make an outfit with one of 3 bags of boring fabric, one containing gray wool, one containing denim, and the third, left unpicked, apparently containing khaki. A real 2 birds with 1 stone kind of approach. Save money by only using bargain bin materials and cram in a weird pick for a sponsor all in one. And I guess they just didn't get enough money from PNC Bank because in the same episode you get another strange bit of product placement with a very not subtle at all ad integration for Pilot Friction pens. Like, they paused the momentum of the planning phase to be like, wow, look at these pens. These pens truly draw like no other pens. These pens are so great. I need to go out of my way to tell you how great these pens are. I think the most absurd was the episode sponsored by my arch nemesis and 5th horseman of the apocalypse, Eli Lilly and Company. So in episode 8, they're each paired with a person with eczema, and the whole episode is vaguely centered around eczema awareness, including these moments where they pretty much stare directly at the camera and explain what eczema is. And like, I don't have eczema, I don't want to speak for the people who deal with that affliction, but this seems a little tenuous. Like, maybe if they had leaned a little harder on the aspect of some materials being skin safe while others aren't, maybe this would have felt a little less ham-fisted. Off topic, but I don't tend to like the making clothes for regular people themed episodes, which Project Runway generally uses once per season, because it's always so stifling for the designers to have to work around their tastes. Like, in the real world, if the clothes they're making aren't up to these people's standards, they could just not buy from their collection. Whether it's to fit in with a team challenge or to work around somebody's arbitrary tastes, I don't think these designers are ever doing their best work when they're forced to compromise their vision. Also in this episode, Jesus and his model were just all over each other, like, goodness gracious, get a room you two. So what's my main problem with the Lilly collaboration? Besides the fact that it felt extremely clumsy and out of place, sorry, I just got a notification from my continuous glucose monitor. You know, type 1 diabetes is an autoimmune condition where your body decides to destroy the cells responsible for processing sugars for no fucking reason because God has decided you haven't suffered enough. And when you're living in America like I am, this means you get to spend hundreds of dollars on insulin on top of spending hundreds of dollars on insurance per month because the wonderful folks at pharmaceutical giants like Eli Lilly and Company have decided that it's cool to kill diabetic people for profit. Am I doing this right? Are you educated yet? I don't know, maybe I could have appreciated this message more if it came from anything that wasn't a gigantic blood-sucking pharmaceutical company. A counterexample to this weird sponsorship is Season 7, Episode 4, which coincidentally was the episode that Jesus got the axe in his first season. In this episode, the sponsor was from Campbell's Soup, and this was also a health awareness-focused challenge using regular person models, this time focused on models who suffer with heart conditions. And at a glance, this also seems like it's extremely weird and out of place. However, they made this integration feel relatively seamless by tying into a real-life Fashion Week gala sponsored by Campbell's partner, the American Heart Association, thereby making the strange pairing thematically appropriate. And beyond the more suitable framing, I find this message more digestible when it's delivered by Big Soup rather than Big Pharma. Also, I can't even express how much more likable Jesus is in his initial appearance on this show, presumably because production isn't goading him into acting like an explosive, hair-triggered drama queen at all times. He meshes well with the other contestants, he accepts his loss graciously with a smile on his face, and expresses his gratitude for the opportunity to appear on the show, even if he didn't get too far along in the competition. I just hope the real Jesus Estrada is more like the way they portrayed him on Season 7 than they did on Season 21. Number 6, obvious production meddling. Now, you're not going to find a televised reality show that doesn't contain some degree of production meddling. There's a reason why there's a block of credits called the story producers, because even the most grounded reality shows contain a fictional narrative. This is a feature, not a bug. If you're just watching a bunch of disjointed clips of people going about their business, you're probably not going to be entertained. It's just that this narrative manipulation should feel seamless. You shouldn't be actively aware of the fact that it's going on. Like with the editing, it's most effective when it's not jumping out at you. I think previous seasons of Project Runway were pretty decent at concealing this. This season was not. One really glaring example of this was the fake-out double elimination from episodes 8 and 9. It's not unheard of for Project Runway to do a double elimination, but this is always following in the wake of a non-elimination, where both of the people on the bottom are, for whatever reason, spared. This is because, if you think about it for longer than a couple seconds, this is the only way it makes sense. A season has to have a set amount of episodes. If you do a double elimination first, you have to follow it up with a non-elimination, or else you won't have enough content to fill the rest of the season. AKA, you would have to do an episode with no stakes. AKA, an episode you have no reason to watch. So at the end of episode 8, Heidi's like, "Both of you are out. Dun dun dun, to be continued." But then when episode 9 starts, Christian comes in all like, "Objection!" And they all pretend he came in and talked them out of the double elimination. And like, this would be so transparently bullshit even if it didn't break the structure of the season, because I don't believe that Christian Siriano has gone to bat for anyone in his entire life. Just dumb, staged, extremely fake, extremely cheap engagement bait. Another example of this was when Ethan showed up as Utica for the judging of what, in my opinion, was his all-time worst design, this denim dress for the Boring Materials Challenge in episode 3, which distinctly resembles a toilet seat. They definitely framed this as his idea, like he wanted to make a big splashy impression to go with his big, different type of splashy dress. Well, the judges hated the dress, but they also expressed that they thought it was distasteful that Ethan showed up as Utica instead of as Ethan. The thing is, this wasn't his idea. The producers actively sabotaged him in this episode in a number of ways. They insisted that he show up as Utica specifically for the sake of making a fool out of him, which is so mean, so unbelievably mean. And even the dress itself, which would have been far less out of place if the challenge was specifically avant-garde, was partially so absurd because this challenge was framed as making a design that Sofia Vergara would wear. And the fact that he chose this design was yet another act of producer sabotage, because apparently they downplayed the whole "you're making this for Sofia" aspect when they were presenting the challenge to the designers. So he was pretty much set up to fail in every single way possible, and yet was spared regardless because there's no way in hell they're letting go of that Drag Race audience. It's not like anybody else is watching this season. In reality TV, there's always going to be some strings being pulled, but they should never be as visible as they were in this season. It kills your suspension of disbelief and makes you question the integrity of the competition. And as a reality competition show, it inherently doesn't have much integrity, but that fact shouldn't be front and center when you're watching. Now let's take a break with a reverse compliment sandwich. There are a few things that I appreciated in this season, but not enough for me to do an actual compliment sandwich unless it's like open-faced. So instead I'll stick it in the middle. So in a nod to inclusivity, Project Runway for the last few seasons has been using plus-size models mixed in with the straight-size models, and I think this was executed extremely poorly in the first few seasons after this change. There was always a distinct feeling of the plus-size models being a disadvantage for the designers who were working with them. They tended to get worse appraisals of their work, they tended to get the same criticisms about fit and being unflattering repeatedly, and according to one of the past contestants, they didn't even get a plus-size mannequin to use in the workroom, making those fit issues extremely difficult to avoid in the first place. However, in this season, I didn't really notice any of those issues. It felt like the plus-size models were well integrated and seemed to get a fair shake in the judging, greatly aided by the designers actually getting to work on plus-size mannequins. So good on them for hearing past criticism and working to mitigate that. And I liked several of the contestants. Despite the fact that this cast didn't exactly blow me away, I didn't really actively dislike many of them, with a couple notable exceptions. Despite the fact that I do believe this season was at least partially rigged in Ethan's favor, I really did like him as a contestant. He would consistently put out really high-quality designs, and he did jump on the VJ hate train a little more than I would have liked, but he's way more tempered with it than a certain pair of genetically identical contestants. I think his inclusion in this season represents the show veering away from something that I previously disliked, which was a total aversion to anything and everything that could be considered costumey. Getting the "it looks like a costume" feedback was an omen of doom in prior seasons, and this always really bugged me. I just don't understand why resembling or even being a costume precludes a design from being good fashion. I mean, for God's sake, this is Heidi Klum's show. They should know a thing or two about a good costume. Meanwhile, drag sensibilities are all about being costumey and over the top, which previous contestants who had a drag background really suffered for in the judging. However, Ethan largely didn't, save for that act of producer sabotage in episode 3. I found this to be an encouraging change. I also liked VJ, partially in the form of rooting against her villain edit, and partially because she put out some of the strongest designs in this entire season. Her unconventional materials design was an absolute knockout, and a great example of relying on actual unconventional materials instead of just scrounging for fabric wherever it can be found. And I also think she had the most incredible look of the entire season in the form of this chainmail gown that was her showstopper in the finale. How she made this with a 5-day time limit with 4 other outfits is beyond me. Another one of my favorites was Joan, who brought such a warm, grounded energy to the cast that I think was sorely needed, and I wish she stuck around a little longer, but was pleased to see her come back as an assistant in the finale. Let's see, what else did I like about this season? Nothing. Okay, back to being a hater. Example episode, Unconventional Materials. Instead of going through this season episode by episode, I'm going to select just one that I think highlights a number of problems with this season. That is episode 4, the Unconventional Materials Challenge. Unconventional Materials Challenges are a Project Runway staple, and they are consistently some of my favorite episodes. The gist is that they're let loose in some store or other location that is not a fabric shop and have to make an outfit using only the provided materials. This is a super fun way to push the contestants' creativity and problem-solving skills, and this is hands down the worst unconventional materials challenge that they've ever done. The basic setup is pretty much fine. This episode had an Abbott Elementary sponsorship, which is okay. I think it's more or less always fair game for one of these sponsorships to promote another TV show. So the designers are let loose in this staged gymnasium science fair and have to complete their outfits using materials just from that. And as is typically the case with this type of challenge, they don't have a budget, just a limited amount of time to grab as much stuff as they can. And then we move on to the workroom. Madeline is getting a whole lot of screen time, which means she's on the chopping block. Not this episode though, but the next one, but they sure want you to think she's going home because she's riding the struggle bus for this entire episode. Madeline has a personality that wouldn't be out of place in a normal season of Project Runway, but since this is season 21 where you're contractually mandated to be screaming all the time, the fact that she's so low-key and soft-spoken kind of makes her stick out. On the plus side, there's an instance of Christian actually giving useful criticism for once. Melania was about to make a raincoat out of the vinyl of a banner, and Christian shot down that idea by pointing out that vinyl raincoats are not even slightly an unconventional material. Not exactly constructive criticism because he doesn't exactly offer a way forward, but choosing to not apply the materials unconventionally has really screwed over other contestants in the past, so there's a chance that he could have saved her here. Some designs of note, there's this shuttlecock dress by VJ, which repurposes the webbed plastic into something that looks remarkably like lace, which I thought was so creative and well executed. There's Ethan's butterfly dress, which I think was one of his best works in the whole season. It's so pretty and over the top. Jesus' repurposing of the soccer balls into an interesting and very wearable dress also turned out great. Okay, now even I'm contributing to the main character problem, but hey, when they do good, they do good. And then there's one in particular that I thought was not so great. Yu Chen also used soccer balls as the basis of his outfit, and I thought this was... terrible. It barely covers her body. The pieces are just sticking out all over in a way that I think looks extremely unintentional, and it's accessorized with these little molecular models that I think look very out of place in every way except for the color. And worst of all, the back of this skirt has sculpted cheeks. Like, he kept the soccer ball shape to give this skirt big, flouncy butt cheeks. Frankly, I thought this was gross and tacky. Easy pick to be sent home, at least if I was the judge. But that's not how this show works. You don't win or lose based on the decision of one single judge. Everything is more or less proceeding as expected until you hit the episode's halfway point, in which things start falling apart in a way that is simply unprecedented. First, by the time the challenge is complete, they reveal the absolute pinnacle of stupid runways that they've used in this season. The goddamn workroom. The harsh, fluorescent-lit, blue and orange portal-colored workroom. They have never done this on the show before, and you know what? Sometimes trying something new isn't innovation. People have just never done it before because it sucks. This is one of those times. Like, already, ouch. But then, they bring out the judge. Singular. I wonder if it's going to be the one who doesn't prioritize the actual designs when he's judging. Of course it is! Of course it's Law Roach! Because if they ever find an opportunity to screw something up in this season, they'll take it every single time. This whole situation just reeks of corner cutting. Like, okay, you didn't use the runway because you couldn't afford the runway. You didn't bring in any other judge but Law because you couldn't afford Heidi and Nina and a guest judge. I can't explain it any other way, because why on earth would they do this? And so, how does he judge? Maybe he picked the most creative and innovative use of materials to be the winner. Maybe he picked the one that's the most elaborate and ornate. Maybe he picked the one that's most wearable. What do you think? What do you think? Oh god, I'm so tired. Yeah, he picked the goddamn underboob bubble butt soccer dress. I am so certain that this would have got torn apart if it was any other judge. VJ and Ethan got brought up as honorable mentions, either of which would be a perfectly satisfactory choice to win this challenge, but no, the season is single-mindedly determined to make me angry. And then we get to the bottom three, and Law Roach actually says out loud, with his mouth, that one of the contestants was placed in the bottom solely based on styling. He said he loved Antonio's dress. He loved it! But he picked the wrong effing boots. And so he's in the bottom three. And Law can clearly detect that he's being unfair with this decision because he just jumps on the defensive unprompted. He's like, I'm just trying to teach you things. This is my expertise. Yeah, that is your expertise. Which is exactly why you should have never been included on the judging panel in the first place. And then Law just kind of loses his temper because Jesus dared to defend Antonio's look. And I don't really care for going to bat for either of the twins. I think the way that they behaved could occasionally be pretty detestable. But the thing that set Law off in this situation, Jesus said, and I quote, "I like it." What incredible disrespect. Send him to the pillory. Somehow this episode isn't done making stupid decisions. On one hand, thank God Law didn't get an opportunity to single-handedly vote someone out. On the other hand, oh my god, they made the designers vote out the loser like this is total drama fucking island. No one is happy with this. Everyone is openly miserable about it, just like they are with the relentless one-day challenges. They're weeping over this, as they should be. They're human beings. They didn't sign up to be a judge, and now they're being forced to essentially backstab one of their associates. Anyway, Joseph McCrae gets the axe. I think this was fair. His was extremely simple, didn't make creative use of materials, and didn't look particularly good. Again, if I got my way, Yu Chen would have been out in this episode, but no, he gets to stick around and get sent home on something that is somehow even more tacky and ridiculous, that being this disco ball titty horn dress that he made for the Western Challenge in episode 7. At least Law knew what to say to that one.
We hate the dress. We hate the dress. We hate the dress.
This episode is a perfect display of every problem that I have with this season. Breaking the formula for no reason to its detriment, obvious and glaring corner cutting, creating big over-the-top drama moments for no reason, Law Roach. Ugh, I need a drink. Of water. Next issue, Insecurity. If a TV show can be called self-conscious, then season 21 of Project Runway would absolutely fit the bill. It is not a season that believes that people are going to want to keep watching it, and I have one single, absolutely massive piece of evidence for that. Viewers of this season might have noticed that I've been omitting something. A big something. And it's time for me to unbury that lead. So Project Runway's general format is hardly unique as far as competition shows go. Give the contestants a challenge, judge them on the results of that challenge, pick one of them as the winner, and finally pick one of them to go home. It's tried and true. There's really no improving on this formula. It's almost as if deciding to break this formula would make the show substantially worse. So, which part of it did they ruin, huh? Well, they give the designers a challenge, and then that challenge is completed over the course of the episode, and the second half is the runway and judging. And then they select a winner, and then they bring in the designers at risk of going home. And then the episode ends. That's right, this season introduced a cliffhanger elimination. Instead of seeing who goes home at the end of the episode, neatly following the pattern that they've established for 2 decades because there's nothing wrong with it and makes incredibly little sense to do it any other way, they're like, oh, you better tune into the next episode to see who's going home. This is what I mean by insecurity. This season is so horrifically insecure that anyone is willing to keep watching it that they have to resort to what is essentially the television equivalent of clickbait. It serves absolutely no other purpose than to coerce you into letting the episodes autoplay. And this is additionally nonsensical because this season isn't a streaming exclusive. It got a standard weekly TV release as it's always had. So while this show was actively being aired, this gimmick served absolutely no purpose. This kind of cliffhanger doesn't even work to increase retention when you don't immediately have the next episode available, because this whole season isn't memorable enough to recall what they were being judged on by the time the next episode airs. This choice turns the pacing of the show into something unfathomably bizarre. It's extremely counterintuitive, it destroys the momentum of the judging sequence, and it has the effect of making you want to drop the show, not continue watching it. Even if I'm watching it with all the episodes available for viewing, I don't want to be interrupted with a previously on Project Runway just for them to complete a story that should have been told within a single episode. There is a reason that competition shows do not do this, and whoever is responsible for this decision deserves to be fired with extreme prejudice, or at least reassigned somewhere where they can't ruin things. You should not be forced to watch the first 5 minutes of the next episode just for the sake of getting the experience that should be contained in only one. Because I'd like to be one of those constructive criticism mentor types, I will offer a simple way forward. Just stick to the formula. The one that works, the one that results in a show that people like. Kill the cliffhanger elimination, chill out on the crazy editing and shaky cam, hone in on the fashion more than the interpersonal drama. Trust that the competition and the artistry of the contestants is enough to keep people watching. All of these changes are just innovation for innovation's sake. That's exactly how you get HBO Max rebranding into Max and then unrebranding into HBO Max again. If the long-established winning formula of this show isn't enough to warrant keeping it on the air, then maybe Project Runway should just be put to rest. It's sad, but I'm always on the side of ending things while they're still good instead of stretching it into an unrecognizable mess. And they've already taken a step in that latter direction with this season, and I just hope they don't make it any worse. For my own well-being, I can't force myself to keep talking about this show. In summary, Season 21 bad. If you're not familiar with Project Runway but are interested in checking it out, I recommend literally any season that isn't this one. Pre-2018, post-2018, anything that isn't Season 21. And if you've watched previous seasons and decided you hate the show, then maybe you'll like the direction they took Season 21. And that's fine. It's just that we can't be friends. In my opinion, a season like this is only able to exist because we, as a culture, have been subjected to a boil the frog approach of everything getting gradually worse. There's no one to tell the folks who are responsible for the extremely bizarre pivots this season has taken that they're squandering the property, because who cares if money is still coming in and they're cutting costs wherever they can? Who cares so long as they've still got sponsorships from Lilly and PNC Bank and Pilot Friction pens? We don't need to make good TV. We don't need to preserve the legacy of this competition that's lasted for decades. We just need a familiar name and a handful of familiar faces, and maybe let's trick the Drag Race crowd into tuning in and we'll call it a day. Basically, everything sucks now. If you'll excuse me, I'll go crawl back in my 2000s media cave where everything still sucked but in a way that was more tolerable and easier to ignore. Okay, Bye. Thank you so much to Fishcatch for helping to make these videos possible. If you'd like to support this channel, please consider supporting me on Patreon via the link in the description. I just got energy drink in my eyeball.